All right. Hey, what's up, guys? Coach Mac, play fast. Everybody, whoever's out there, can you hear me? Hope everything's going all right. Figured I'd take a chance on a Wednesday night before the playoffs. Nothing really going on right now. Take a chance to talk about a little bit about the national championship game, what everybody thinks, what your opinion was. Obviously, there's going to be some different varying opinions on the national championship game. There's going to be talk about who should be in, who shouldn't be in. Um, the system that you need to go to. Do you need more teams in? How many teams do you need in? How are you going to pick those teams? I actually thought it was, for what it was worth. Obviously, the game was not very good, but I think we're going to get into, uh, a world where we are discussing deserving to be in and the best physical teams in college football, which is going to be, probably, it's going to be an up and down, give or take argument. I think when you look at it, there are some conferences that are not equal to other conferences and teams that are putting up records, championship appearances, things that make you quote unquote deserving to be in a game as opposed to maybe the best teams that should be there. I think we're going to get into an argument now where, my take on it has been very simple. In the four-team system that we've had a bunch of games that are not even anywhere near competitive. So if we are picking the four teams that we think deserve to be there and those games aren't competitive, where are we going to get to, in a situation where you're picking 8 teams, 10 teams, 12 teams? Obviously, you can pick some type, depending on the amount of games that you can end up playing, you can pick some type of system where teams are going to get buys, and then maybe we can, possibly get rid of some of the worst teams in the early rounds and then get it down to where the better teams are in there later on. Um, but it's still going to come down to a scenario where if it's subjective and we're taking what we think are the most deserving teams as opposed to who we think are the most competitive teams, I think you're always going to end up with these type games. Now, the big deal to me is TCU was able to beat Michigan. Would Michigan have given Georgia a better game simply dude on dude? When you look at rosters, maybe Michigan would have been able to give Georgia a better game, but they couldn't beat TCU, so they don't deserve to be there. So, how we look at the system, what we're looking to do with the system. Are we looking to get more teams involved from a financial standpoint? Is, the NCAA looking to get more teams involved so that some of the lower echelon conferences or Power Five, Group of Five, whatever you want to call them now, so that those teams feel like they have a chance to get in so that they stay with the NCAA? I don't know if any of those teams could ever disband from the NCAA, but we're in a world where we're trying to give some of those teams their just due to say that you deserve to be here based on your body of work. But that body of work is really not the same or similar to the body of work. I mean, you could look at Georgia in the SEC, and you could probably say that there's four teams in the SEC that could probably give Georgia a better game than TCU could have. But yet TCU is more deserving based on body of record, body of work, the things that they did. Maybe we get to a point where we say you have to win a championship to be in these games because TCU, you know, um, couldn't even win the Big 12 championship. So maybe they don't deserve to be there because they're not a Big 12 champion. Underdog who gets hot and beats a better team. It's not all about the best teams in general. It's the best teams. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's going to be the best teams that day, but I think um, when you look at the Georgia TCU game, I don't think it was about the best team that day. I think one team was so far superior. I mean, that to me, in a championship setting, that was the closest to a high school scenario that I can fathom in my mind. The rosters of those two teams were so dramatically different. And, as a YouTube guy that talks about schemes and talks about offense, defense, and things that you need to do to stay competitive, things that are different, things that we're doing, whatever the case may be that we discuss on the YouTube channel. Um, at the end of the day, high school football comes down a lot of times to rosters that are dramatically different, right? So schematics sometimes go out the window when the rosters, even in playoff and state championship games, the rosters are so dramatically different that schematics never get a chance to really play into the equation. And that's kind of, for me, the way the national championship game went. Everybody's going to look at how TCU plays defense, and they're going to look at them getting boat raced. And that's obviously part of the discussion. Don't get me wrong. But that defense for them in the conference they're in with the schedule they play was good enough to put together a body of work to be deserving to be a top four team. So, how can you fault TCU for playing the structures that they play on offense and defense, doing the things that they do on offense and defense, where their seasonal 12 game, 13 game body of work makes them one of the top four deserved teams by our system to be in the college football playoffs and to win a game to get into the championship, right? So schematically, you can't fault TCU for what they do. It served its purpose. It did what they needed to do. For years as a 4-2-5 team, they were a intriguing football team that people across the country, especially high school people, studied inside and out with Gary Patterson to play that style of defense. But it never was good enough to get them to the championship. Now they play a broken stack 3-3-5 defense that got them to the level that they want to get to. It got them national exposure. It got them to the national championship game, and then they got boat raced. So, because of the outcome of the game, are we now going to look at the scheme and the structure and say that the scheme and the structure doesn't hold up against better football teams? Well, maybe it doesn't. Based on the result, maybe it doesn't. But to me, the bigger issue is the roster doesn't hold up versus those types of teams. And in the SEC, maybe the Big Ten, I don't know. But in conferences that are that good and that strong, those teams are seeing that more often than not. They're seeing it at least 2, maybe 3 times a year. And then they get to a national championship game and they play a roster that is not even probably 3rd, 4th, or 5th in the SEC. So, you go back a week and say, well, maybe they shouldn't even have been there because Ohio State probably could have or should have won the game against Georgia. Well, let's look at the two rosters. Let's compare 4-stars and 5-star players. The two rosters are very similar in nature. And the dude factor of Georgia and Ohio State is a lot different than the dude factor of TCU and Georgia. So schematically, we can look at all the things that we want to look at to analyze what you could do, should do with your schemes, what holds up, what doesn't hold up. But to me, as a high school guy for 25 years, the simplest thing I can say to you is Ohio State's roster can play with Georgia's roster. TCU's roster currently cannot play with Georgia's roster. So, yes, there were things that were schematically flawed. Yes, Georgia had a great game plan to attack the odd front, 4-eye, sometimes tight front, 3 high structures. Yes, they had a good game plan to attack that schematically, but you can also look at that game and say, I don't know what TCU could have played, should have played, or would have played that could have made that game any different. So, from a fan standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from somebody who wants to watch the game to analyze it and figure out schematically what you may want to do or which scheme is better, I'm not sure we can really look at the game that way because to me, it played out similar to a high school playoff game or a high school championship game. One team was that much more dominant than the other team, and the schematics really don't come into play. Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it from a salary cap deal or you look at it from a professional sports deal, that might be the only way to possibly even the playing field, but you can't punish the big time programs for raising the money that they've raised and doing the things that they've done to improve facilities. It kind of becomes an arms race in a way, which is probably not fair. But at the end of the day, that's our economy. That's the world we live in. You can't punish Apple or big time businesses to make them even with other businesses when they did all the work to lay, the foundation of them being that successful. So I still think we live in a world where blue chippers are blue chippers. Certain schools are going to have a dramatic advantage over other schools based on, their heritage, their history, their facilities. But we finally got to a world where we put somebody in that was deserving to be in based on their body of work. And I think we found out that deserving doesn't necessarily mean the best teams that we could possibly put in the playoff. Now, if you eliminate results of who's deserving to be there and you just go subjectively, that's always going to be questioned at the end of the day, unless we get a great national championship game. It's always going to be subjective. If you put a team in with 2 losses that doesn't even play in the conference championship, like in Alabama, who everybody knows would, if they do get to the national championship game, are certainly going to play a better game than TCU did. And you can probably name 4 or 5 other schools. Heck, Tennessee probably, played a better game against Georgia the first time. They could have played a better game. LSU could probably give you a better game. Michigan certainly could have gave you a better game, but they blew their opportunity. Ohio State gave you 100% better game, but it just so happened that it was in the first round, not the finals. So, subjectively, when you look at it, I think a lot of us that have been around the game as a fan, a coach, a player, could probably tell you the 4 teams that could get in there, regardless of their status or their standard, could get in there and give you the 4 best teams in the playoffs, right? I think most of us could look at rosters and look at results during the season and tell you who probably the 4 best physical, most talented teams are that could give you the best setting that you want. Well, when you do that, you then take away from all these other conferences and teams to say, look, whatever you did during the year is kind of irrelevant. Yes, you went 12-1. Yes, you made it to your championship game. Yes, you had top 5 wins. Whatever the scenario is to rank these teams, you kind of take all the luster away from that, where at the end of the day, you just say, look, these are the best 4 rosters. This is the best opportunity we have to make competitive games. And it kind of deflates or takes the air out of the ball from all these other teams playing in conferences, playing for conference championships, going 11-1, 12-1. But, at the end of the day, when you look at it, when you start looking at the TV numbers and you start analyzing how many people turn that game off at halftime, just after halftime, now you've got to look at it from an economical standpoint and say, okay, well, we put teams in that we thought were deserving. TCU beats Michigan and earns their way to the national championship game. And we end up in a 65-7 game that people turned off, and we lost 17 million viewers or however many viewers halfway through the game. So from a financial standpoint, if we're looking at TV ratings and trying to put money in people's pockets, well, then we obviously didn't have the best teams involved in the college playoff system. But we had the most deserving teams. So the argument of best, competitive, deserving is going to be the argument we're constantly into. And I don't know if 8, 10, 12 teams really changes that. I think if you look at it from a standpoint of, okay, we're going to go with a certain amount of teams and we're going to give buys out, and those teams are going to have to play each other early, and then they'll knock each other off. And then the teams that have buys will play the next one. And hopefully we get that 65-7 game in the second round and not the finals, yeah, I think maybe we could get to that point. But my argument has always been if we have four teams in a college playoff, and more often than not, we've seen games that are, whether it's first round, second round, we've seen games that have been blowouts that are not competitive. Well, then if we've got four teams and we can't make competitive games, how in the world are 12 teams going to give us some type of competitive format? Now, on any given night, any given team could probably beat somebody. I certainly get that. You look at the NCAA basketball tournament, you look at the FCS playoffs and the rest of the division or the NCAA playoffs. Number of games is going to be an issue when you go to a format like that. Now you're going to have to play extra games. I don't know how many more games coaches want to agree to. But, certainly from a competitive standpoint, it's really easy to look at a game like that and say, look, there's something flawed with the system. That game was not even remotely close from a competitive standpoint, and we need to do something different. Now, what different is obviously going to be subjective to everybody's opinion. And I don't think there's a right or wrong opinion. We've had some games that have not been good in the college playoff system. We've had some games that have been good. We've had some years where there's been an argument about teams that shouldn't get in, teams that have two losses, teams that have whatever. But I think in the years that we let teams in that had two losses, they competed more, if not won, the end goal, the ultimate prize, more so than the teams that we say are deserving because of their body of work in their individual conference, which leads us to an argument of, well, how do we then rate the conferences? If they don't all play each other during the year, if they don't get exposure to each other during the year, how do we then go back and say, okay, 12-1 in this conference is really 9-4 in this conference? How do we equate wins and losses with, strength of schedule, who's playing who? Because as much as everybody hates it, to the viewer's eye, it's very simple. The last 10, 15 years, there's 3 to 4 teams in the SEC, regardless of their record, that could give you a better showing in a playoff system, national championship system than all of the other teams that have been involved. When Clemson was on top of their game, regardless of record or whatnot, they can give you a better game. Usually Ohio State, regardless of what happens in the Big Ten, can give you a better game. If Michigan could have won their game to get to the championship game, they probably could have gave us a better game. But at the end of the day, that's not what happened. The playoff system set itself. TCU beat Michigan, deserved to be in the championship game, but then we get ourselves in a situation where the championship game is a complete disaster. Now, at the end of the day, did the best team in college football win the national championship? Yes. So I guess we did serve a purpose with the playoff system and the national championship game, because the best team in football, in my opinion, through their body of work, through their roster, through what they look like on TV every Saturday, I think the best football team won the college championship. So I don't think we have a system where it's flawed because the best team didn't win. But, when it's all said and done, what you're going to need to look at is are we looking for TV ratings? Are we looking for competitive games? Are we looking for games that fans can watch and get into? Well, if that's the way you want to go, then you're going to have to be very subjective about who you choose, because some of the teams with 1 loss, 2 losses don't get to their championship game, may be physically better football teams than the teams that do have the pedigree to get there. So, for me, personally, I'm glad I'm not on that committee. Obviously, for the money involved to be part of that committee, I'd love to take the job for the financial benefits of being on that committee. But I would never want the, hypocrisy of making a choice to determine who's in those games, because I don't know if you're ever going to find a right answer. So you pick the most deserving, this is the result you get. You pick the best teams, now you're going to have people argue and say, why do we even play a 12-game season? Why do we, have a system to choose the most deserving teams where these teams before the season even starts can't get in. It's going to be Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Clemson or somebody else. Well, right now, maybe those are the best four football programs in the country. Can somebody beat them on a week? They sure can. But when push comes to shove and the two rosters get together to play a game, is the result not going to be what it was 99% of the time the other night? Yes, it is. Could you get a closer game if TCU plays better, Georgia plays worse, turnovers, whatever the case may be, momentum? Yes, you probably could. When you look at the two rosters, were you ever going to get a much better game? No, I don't think so. And as we kind of digress to maybe a different topic, I think TCU was one of the most portal built teams, transfer laden teams in college football this year. Very successful for what they chose to do. But is that the route you need to, you really need to go when at the end of the day, look at the result? Yes, they got there. Yes, they put themselves on a national stage. Yes, they probably helped their recruiting tremendously if they're going to recruit high school players. Yes, they're going to draw more players in the portal now. So it probably was a successful venture for TCU. But at the end of the day, a school like TCU building their team that way, is that the way you need to build it to end up beating a Georgia? We'll never know. Obviously before the portal got out of hand and the NIL deals got out of hand, a team like TCU couldn't put a roster together to beat Georgia, Alabama, or Clemson anyway. So getting there now is half the battle, because previously they probably couldn't have put together a roster to do anything different either way, right? So teams like TCU will still get a chance, but teams that are probably more qualified, like you mentioned. Yeah, so if you go 12 teams and you have it ranked, the better teams, when they get a chance to play people, regardless of the seeding, should win those games. And you should, in theory, end up with two of the better teams in college football without upsets, obviously. And that system could possibly work. Again, my argument is we've picked four teams that we think are the most deserving based on their body of work, and we're still getting blowouts. How in the world is 12 teams going to help us? I don't know. Maybe it eliminates some of the fodder of people that deserve to be there based on their body of work. But when the rosters show up, their roster cannot play with the other roster. So eventually they get bounced before the championship game. Maybe. I don't know. Let's see. I don't follow NCAA that much, but I think it's good. Not Power Five got to the Final Four. I guess it's good for the league overall. I don't know if it's good or not. Figure. I mean, I don't know what's good to get to a game that's 65-7, that 18 million viewers turn off in the third quarter. Not really sure if that's a good thing for football. Not really sure if the championship game and TV ratings being all that they are, I'm not sure how much of a good thing that was for college football, because the people tuned out. People didn't watch it. Maybe you had maybe TCU had a following that added to the pot, because it's not the same teams every year and the same college football fans are going to watch the game. And now you draw other fans in that maybe wouldn't watch the game. I don't know from the TV numbers, but I do know the way the game ended up shaking itself out, that you probably lost 17 to 18 million viewers. How does it always work in these things that you get these people that come on to try and like pitch whatever their deal is? It's a football chat. We're talking about football. I don't need to see all this other nonsense about what you're trying to sell me. But I guess in a public setting, when you make it a public forum, that's what you got to deal with. Portal topic, in my opinion, it's an interesting scheme implications. If a team decides to build through the portal, a coach might have to simplify their offense and defense. Yeah, now you're getting into 1-year deals, 2-year deals, not 4-year deals. Can you develop players? Can you put together a roster for the long haul? I think we're probably out of that world now for the most part. Maybe teams like Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, maybe they can still build their team the way they want to build it, add 1 or 2 from the portal when they lose a kid to a first-round draft pick, and still build their team around 4 or 5-star recruits that they can develop. I don't know. I know on our end, from the high school perspective, it's absolutely killing us. Oh, thanks, Boomer. I kind of figured maybe that's what it is, but I mean, there's currently 7 people on this chat. So if there's a system of bots popping up on live chats, you probably need to do your analytics a little bit different because this is probably not the chat to pop up on. Um, I'm sure there's other chats out there that have more viewers than we have. This is kind of a niche market where people are popping up because they're football junkies like I am, and they want to talk about anything football, especially since the college football season's now over. So if you were doing the analytics on bots, you probably need to change the configuration of how you determine where the bots and what chats the bots are going to go into, because this is not a great chat setting for bots to be in economically. But again, it's killing the high school game because we're now getting all these kids that probably have a chance to play a certain level of football, maybe be a scholarship player. And now they're losing those opportunities because colleges are only signing 11 kids and they're taking 14 from the portal. And now other kids are losing opportunities because now that this school is only signing 11, the kids that would have been maybe D1 players are ending up 1AA players. And the kids that were 1AA players are ending up Division II players. And the kids that were Division II players are ending up with no place to play because, through the scholarships and taking, with the portal, the way it works, you still can only sign 25 guys. So teams can't take unlimited portal players and sign 25 high school kids. That's not the way the system works. You only have 85 scholarships that you can give out. And the way the numbers work out, you can't just take anything you want to take. So, when a kid comes in through the portal and he's a scholarship player, he's going to count towards your numbers. So, you're kind of building a team where you lose players, you replace them with portal players instead of high school players. Now you can't sign as many high school kids. So now, you're in a world where you're building your roster around 1 or 2 year players that were from a portal, and they're going to be gone in a year or two. And now you've got to figure out what your numbers are within each class, freshmen, sophomores, juniors. And it's just making the whole system that much more flawed with how teams are doing it. So, okay, so you can match player for player to reach 85, but you still have to reach 85. So if you're matching that through the portal, you're still not going to take high school kids. So all the guys that I've talked to that are recruiting say, hey, we're only signing 6 high school kids this year. We're only signing 5 high school kids this year. So if they're only signing 5 or 6 high school kids as opposed to 25 or 24 with maybe a transfer or a grad school kid or however you want to look at it, well, now they're only taking 6, which means there's 19 other spots that they would have took high school kids. So now those high school kids are going to fall somewhere. So they're going to fall to lower echelon SEC, Big Ten, ACC. The other kids are now going to fall from SEC, ACC to Group of 5. The Group of 5 kids are now going to fall to 1AA. The 1AA kids are now going to fall to D2. And all those other kids are left with nowhere to play. So it's going to change, in my opinion, it's going to change the landscape of high school recruiting, and it's going to kind of take a hit. The game of football takes a big enough hit already with concussions and injuries, and now it's going to take a bigger hit because now all these kids that thought they had a chance to play end up with nowhere to play, and football's tough enough to play. They may choose another avenue or another sport to play because now, the greatest thing about football, in my opinion, with roster sizes is they were the most amount of scholarships out there for kids to get. So you could always argue with a kid and say, look, you want to play basketball, you're 6'1", there's a million of you out there, and basketball teams only have X amount of scholarships. If you play football, they have more scholarships. A 6'1" kid is an NFL body type at DB or a certain position, but a 6'1" kid is not a prototypical NBA kid unless you're absolutely special. So now some of these kids may choose earlier in their career to go a different avenue because there aren't as many opportunities anymore in football because of the transfer portal. And then what about of the over 3,000 kids in the portal, what about the 2,500 that end up with nowhere to play? And now they had a scholarship, they left a scholarship, and they have no scholarship and have to pay to go to school somewhere or have to recreate or remarket themselves. That's a completely different issue. What about the system now where because of the NIL and the portal, teams are now having to come up with more money to keep kids because they'll threaten to go in the portal if you don't up the ante to keep them. And there's other schools out there that are offering them X amount of money to come to their school, which we know is out there. We know it's going on. It hasn't been proven yet, but through hints, allegations, innuendo, we all know that it's out there. So, now with the NIL deal, we're kind of creating a, a, a leverage deal for players that now have leverage over the schools that are giving them $150,000 education. So, do these players deserve to make money? Probably so, based on the amount of money that they bring in for their institution. But are they not making money with a $150,000 degree that probably based on their GPA and test score, they never would have qualified for in the first place? Probably 90% of football rosters, if you took away the football scholarship, probably wouldn't have gotten into or accepted into the institution that they're playing in if it was based just on GPA, test scores, and community service hours and a resume. So, where does the 4-year degree weigh into all this to say, all right, look, now you can make millions of dollars through the NIL, but where do we value the actual scholarship and the actual education to say that you can now hold it over people's heads to say, I'm going to transfer, I'm entering the portal unless you come up with more money. Now the degree and the scholarship means absolutely nothing. I gave you a scholarship. I gave you a $150,000 degree, and you're still holding me at ransom for more money. We've created a system that justifiably so, these players probably needed a way to find money for what their value is to college programs. But as an old school guy, to me, your money and your value was in the fact that you're getting a $150,000 education, if not more than that, at some of these schools. When you look at 4-year tuitions and what they would be, economically, you're putting your name on a piece of paper that, let's be honest, 80 to 90% of the kids playing college football may not have gotten into the university of their choice based on the merits of GPAs, test scores, resumes. So, if you're going to be in the football world and you're going to live in this world, you have to take the good with the bad, and you have to be realistic with, yeah, I agree with you, Chris, but does the degree really matter when 90% of the world works in a job outside of their field anyways? How many college students graduate and get jobs in their field? How many people that go to college to get a certain degree end up with a job in their exact field? I think if you did the research on it, it's probably higher than 75% of people that go into the workforce with a degree and a piece of paper that isn't in the field that they chose. Now, doctors, lawyers, specified professions, yes, I agree with it 100%. But how many people go into the world to get a degree in business, a degree in finance, a degree in communications, a degree in sports management, and then when it's time to get a job, you end up getting a job that's outside your field, and probably a lot of people end up having a ton of success in degrees or jobs outside their field. So I don't know if I can agree with the comment of general studies and communications. They're still leaving with a degree from the University of Florida, a degree from the University of Georgia, a degree from Notre Dame. They're leaving with degrees that on a piece of paper hold a lot of weight in the business world that they probably never would have got a chance to get if it wasn't for the fact that they played college football. Right. So, if you look at it from the other perspective to say how many students, so I live in Jacksonville, Florida. We have a ton of people that try to get into the University of Florida. The University of Florida is now almost the Harvard of the South. It's now an institution that is holding its entrance to a ludicrous standard. And there's kids that have 3.8, 3.9, 4.0 GPAs and 1,300 test scores that cannot get into the University of Florida. But I would, challenge you to find out the GPA and test scores of the football roster at these schools and tell me how many of those kids would get into the institution if it wasn't for football. Now, as a football guy, the flip side of that is they're bringing in money to the university that the average student is never going to be able to touch. The valedictorian is never going to be worth that much money to the university as the basketball, baseball, football guy. So when it comes down to it, we can argue and agree to disagree, and we can play devil's advocate. Those kids are getting degrees from institutions, regardless of if the degree says communications, general studies, or medicine. They're getting a degree from an institution that they probably wouldn't have got it from if they were just a student, right? So now we've kind of thrown that out the window, and that degree doesn't matter because I'm going to leave to go to another place, and there's another place offering me X amount of money. But that's a whole nother topic, a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. The bottom line is we were talking about the championship game. Is our system working? Is there a better system? Is it about more teams and maybe getting rid of some of the teams that don't belong in early rounds? What's the best way to pick the best four teams? Do you do it just by an eye test and you have people that have coached, played, and been around football their entire life, and when they put film on, they can tell you that this 2-loss team is better than this undefeated team? I don't know. Is it a body of work? I don't know, because the body of work is different in every conference. I think, the other night, to me, proved that if you put TCU in the SEC, the body of work would not be anywhere near what it was in the Big 12. I think that's pretty obvious. There are several SEC teams that played Georgia and fared a heck of a lot better than TCU did. Now, I know it's only one night. I know there's momentum and turnovers and other things. I get all that, right? If they played this game 10 times, I think the result would be similar 9 of the 10 times. Does TCU win once? Maybe. Are the other 9 games that lopsided? Probably close. Let the SEC and Ohio State play in the playoffs each year. If they're the best teams in football, what's wrong with that? If the teams in the SEC and Ohio State are the best rosters on the planet and they're the best teams in football, what is wrong with that scenario? I mean, how else do you want to? We can't come up with a schedule where everybody plays everybody. So we're not going to find out what teams can hang with other teams because you can only play X amount of conference games. The out of conference games are probably getting worse, if not better. If you look at Georgia's schedule next year, it's absolutely ridiculous with their out of conference teams. So, I don't know what other way there is to take these teams and compare them outside of the eye test and looking physically and saying this team is better than that team. But subjectively, and I'm glad you bring that up, Chance, because most people know that I am an Alabama fan. Deservedly, Alabama does not deserve to be there. You didn't take care of business. You didn't get it done in the games you needed to get it done. Would Alabama give Georgia a better game? Everybody knows that. Are there 6 other teams that could have given Georgia a better team? Everybody knows that. But in the landscape of the way they lay things out, you don't deserve to be there. So I have no problem with Alabama not being there. You're never going to see me on Twitter, and you're never going to hear me say that Alabama should have been there because they could give Georgia a better game. I know they can give Georgia a better game. Everybody with a brain knows they can give Georgia a better game, but you didn't do the things you needed to do. And there still has to be some type of onus and some type of parameters on get it done when you need to get it done. And that's what makes you deserving to be there. The amount of 4 stars, 5 stars, your physicality, how talented you are is not necessarily what makes you deserving to be there. Could you be in that game more so than the other team? Yes. I guess there's a point there that they lost that late in the season. They lost in their championship game. They were undefeated going into it. They were also losing to Kansas State by 21 points during the season. So that's not the first time it happened. They were losing by 14 or 20 points in several games this season and found a way to win. So they were certainly deserved based on the body of work and the things that they were able to do. They're a Cinderella story. They fought in multiple games to win. They found a way to win. And at the end of the day, winning is important. Let's not take away the importance of winning football games because it's not easy to do. So they found a way to win the games they needed to win. Alabama found a way to lose the games that they needed to win. Clock management, decisions, play calls, however you want to look at it. Fade seam versus too high, depending on the too high structure. There's different too high structures, in my opinion. If it's a hard cover two with a jam funnel, flat corner, and a safety that's on a hash mark, you're going to look to throw that ball a lot shorter um, down the field in the honey hole, in the window than you would if you were playing a two read team and you're going to occupy the safety with a different vertical route. Well, if the corner is 7 or 8 yards off, by the time you get a chance to throw the fade, it's going to be further down the field. So, you know, steps in the route as far as throwing that ball are probably different based on coverage. If you're playing a press team, in my opinion, the fade and those balls should be thrown a heck of a lot earlier because you have a better chance of completing a 16 to 18-yard throw than you do of completing a 30 to 40-yard throw. So if it was press coverage, I would be throwing those balls a lot sooner. If it's a too high structure where somebody can get off the hash mark, you don't want to throw them later. You want to throw them sooner. If it's a too high structure where the guy on the hash mark is going to be occupied by a route and the corner's 7, 8 yards off, that vertical is never going to be open until further down the field. So to me, coverage would dictate how soon I would be throwing those routes, if that makes sense. I would certainly think the Quentin Johnson kid at receiver starts for almost every school in the country. Um, if he doesn't start for every school in the country, I think he's in the mix at bigger schools. Uh, the one corner they had was supposed to be a dude, but he didn't show up the other night. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think the separation, certainly in high school and now probably based on the other night, the biggest separating factor is the trenches, the guys up front. Can you handle people up front? And can you deal with them blocking and mauling you, even though Georgia threw the ball a ton and TCU had no answer in a, in a 3-3-5 structure with 5 DBs on the field, they got lit up in the passing game. So schematically, that argument isn't a very good one. Um, but to me, especially being a high school guy, it always comes down to the trenches. If you can hang in the trenches, a lot of people have skill players that can hang on the perimeter. The game never gets to the perimeter. The game never gets there. The quarterback's on his face or on his back, and he can't throw the ball. The running backs have nowhere to run the football. So the skill positions get almost negated in high school for 25 years. That is 100% my opinion. When teams are that much better than you up front, all the skill positions get almost negated because you can't do anything with them because of the structure of the box and the inadequacies in the box. Yes, I agree with you, Chance, on that fact. If the TCU was in the SEC or if the SEC played TCU schedules, you'd probably have 2 or 3 undefeated teams, if not one loss teams. I certainly get that. The second argument to that, Chance, is the talented teams are not going to schedule them because on any given week in between conference play, those teams could certainly show up and beat you. So on your weeks where you're not playing, you know, Philly Eagles, see you, bud. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Hope the new year is good for you as well. The counter argument, Chance, in my opinion, is those schools are not going to play. I think the smaller schools, if they wanted to test their valor and get their resume better, they could certainly try and play bigger schools. I don't think the bigger schools are going to play them. I think TCU could beat anybody on any given night. Obviously, the other night wasn't the night, but I don't think there's going to be SEC and ACC schools chomping at the bit to have 3 out of schedule non-conference games that are TCU, Kansas State, USC, Michigan, Ohio State. I don't think that's the tree that they want to bark up. And that to me is the bigger issue than those teams wanting to bite off more than they can chew. I don't know if you're going to find a team willing to go home and home um, with teams that can certainly beat them when, like in the SEC, people bitch about it, and you look at Georgia's schedule next year. Who the hell wouldn't schedule that way when the 8, 9, 10 game rigor of playing in the SEC is as tough as it is? If I was an AD, I'd be scheduling the same way. You got injuries, you got all kind of things that are going on that you're battling with your program. You want to go through that juggernaut of a schedule and then play three absolute potential losses? No, that's not going to happen. Yeah, I mean, early on in the year, the Texas Bama game is what it is. I think by the end of the year, I think you find out that Alabama's 100 times better football team than Texas, not even close. Um, but in that game, certainly Texas probably should have won. As an Alabama fan, I have no problem saying that. Alabama's a million times better football team than Texas. It's not even close. But certainly, as Alabama playing Texas first game of the year, why would you want to play those games? I mean, Texas should have beat you. Texas, probably should have won that football game. And if they play it week 10, I think Alabama might run and clock Texas. But um, not only do they not play them, Boomer, but their non-conference schedule is absolutely atrocious. I don't know how that's going to work. Deion Sanders will be an interesting deal, Chance. I think it's good for college football in a way. Um, he's already ruffled a bunch of feathers. He's already gotten rid of some people, gotten rid of some kids and done some things. But that's the nature of the beast at that level in that business. You can't worry about making people happy. You got to put a team together. And, I worry about the schematic standpoint of what Deion and his staff can put together. I'm a huge Deion Sanders fan. I think he's probably the best DB to ever play the game. Probably one of the most exciting players to ever play the game. When it comes to having to be in a big time game with Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, um, guys like that, I don't know. He better hire some really, really good coordinators and assistants because I don't think he's going to be about that life. I don't disagree with the fact that they might win it in 2 years. Um, who's who's running the defense? And 90% of the schools out there try and get somebody from Bama to do something for them, but if it's not the right person, it doesn't always work. So, um, as an Alabama fan, I don't even know who left to go to Colorado because I don't follow it that in depth. Um, but if it's not Pete Golding and somebody close to that, then I don't know how much of a difference it makes. Uh, I, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you can throw that name out there and say that that's a Bama guy or somebody. Is he part of the system? Yes. Um, if he, I don't know. I think you can. I think you can do your research on that name and find. Um, in my opinion, you can do your research on that name and find where he's been before that, and if and where he's been as a coordinator before that, and tell me some of his results. I don't wish him any ill will. I don't. Guys leave Alabama every year. I'm not a, as a football coach. Um, I'm not that diehard Alabama. I don't have enough time to be that diehard Alabama. I have my own team to take care of and my own issues on Friday night. Um, I've been an Alabama fan since 1978. Grew up on Long Island. Had no other games to watch other than Notre Dame or Alabama. So I watched Alabama. But I am not one of those freaks. I am not one of those. There's a million people in the world that know more about Alabama football than I do. Um, but from the football circle, I can tell you, I don't think Charles Kelly is that answer. I think it's a good hire for Colorado, um, but I don't know if he's uh, that guy. I hope he is. I mean, I don't have. I'd love to see Colorado get good. I think it's good for football. I'm LSU, then Florida Gators because that's where me and my bro went. Yeah, I mean that everybody's got their reasons for being a fan, right? You went to a school, you played at a school. I grew up in the Northeast on Long Island. We don't have, yeah, the pocket rocket. Yeah, I remember David Palmer. Um, we don't have we're a pro based state. Long Island is Giants, Jets, Yankees, Mets, Islanders, Rangers, Knicks, Nets. That's what we are. We don't have big time football. So um, when you grow up in the South or the Southeast, you either went to a big school or you were in an area where your dad took you to games. So it's a lot different to me in this region being a college fan than it is. Like people give me hell all the time. Oh, you're an Alabama fan because they win. Well, I started watching them in 1978. I'm 50 years old. So I've been through ups, I've been through downs. I'm not the college fan that a lot of other people are. I don't live and die on recruiting. I don't live and die on, you know, coaches hiring and coaches getting fired. I have my own job in football. I have my own things that I need to do. So, there's people ask me questions I get direct messages on Twitter all the time asking me stuff about Alabama, and I can't answer the questions they're asking me because I'm really not that into it. I mean, it's not it's not my deal. Do you think I think Stetson Bennett can play in the NFL. I don't think he's going to be a world beater by any means. And it's can he play? Yes. Is he going to be a starter somewhere? Maybe he can be one of the 32 best guys in the league. I don't know. Um, would I be looking at him as that guy? No, I don't think he's that guy. I think he's a awesome competitor. I think he's got great moxie. I think he manages games. Like Stetson Bennett to me is maybe a little bit more talented version than a bunch of the quarterbacks that played at Alabama for a while. So like a Jay Barker. Jay Barker lost one or two college games his whole career and never made it in the NFL. Right? I mean, he's one of those guys. I think AJ McCarron was probably as a quarterback a little bit more talented than Stetson Bennett. Can't run it like he can, but I think, you know, skill set, AJ McCarron, Stetson Bennett's probably maybe a little bit better than Greg McElwain. I don't know, but I don't think he's lights out better than those guys. And those guys couldn't. AJ McCarron did a better job than McElwain, and I hope none of them ever see this as an Alabama fan because I love what they did for Alabama to death. But as a football guy, I'm a Division III player, so for me to critique Division I guys is kind of stupid. But from a standpoint of looking at the NFL and talent and careers, I think those guys were every bit as good as him, especially throwing the football and managing games, and they didn't make it. So I hope he makes it. I'm not anti-Georgia. I'm not anti-Stetson Bennett. Um, I don't watch CJ Stroud enough. I don't see enough of CJ Stroud to know. Bryce Young scares the hell out of me because I think he's 5'11" at best, maybe 6 foot at best. I think he's got a ton of moxie. I think he's got an it factor to him. But I'm not really sure either one. I don't know if either one of them are going to be good NFL players or great NFL players, to be honest with you. Um, I think that, I think maybe the system, maybe, playing for Bill O'Brien, as bad as Alabama might have been on offense at times with their talent, even though when they lost to Tennessee, they scored 40 some odd points. So can't all be the offense, but I think maybe Bill O'Brien has a more NFL ready system than Ohio State. I think Ohio State's system seems to do fairly well getting guys ready for the NFL. The problem with guys like that is they're going to go to bad teams. And when they go to bad teams, it's tough to be a good player on a bad team unless you're just absolutely dynamic and they get shell shocked a year or two in, and then that team's looking to draft another quarterback again. So it's tough unless you're absolutely the guy with all the skill sets. I live in Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence was about, to me, as ready to be an elite quarterback as anybody in the last 10, 15 years. And we were so bad last year that people were almost ready to write him off in Jacksonville. Now I think they see the writing on the wall, but a quarterback at that level is only as good as the people around him. Side distractions just happen to be there. Yeah, To me, Brett, to be honest with you, the body language was, I know that roster, I know my roster, and we're in for a long night. That was the body language to me, um, in my opinion. Let me get back to where Alex asked me something. Our too high check versus empty, Alex, is kind of simple. We don't we play with three safeties, so we don't have to borrow a backside safety. The biggest problem to me with empty is if you're in a base personnel setting, how are you handling? Usually, when I say empty, I say 3-by-2. If it's exotic 4-by-1, those are all game plan deals because that's just not generic. Um, but if you think of empty and you're a 3-by-2 empty set, the biggest thing to me is if you have to use somebody from the backside on the front side of trips, how do you handle the two receivers on the backside? That's where I think, especially at the high school level, that's where everybody gets in trouble. Your trips check is borrowing your backside safety, but now they put two receivers out there. Are you going to walk the will out and lock him man to man on somebody that's a dude? That's where I see teams. So teams that play three safety defenses, I don't think empty is that big of a deal. The bigger deal is you have to figure out a way to eliminate gaps inside and make quarterback runs go where they need to go because you are maxed out in coverage in a lot of places. So, yes, we still base out of odd front. We are a tight front team, and we do not get out of it unless we want to get out of it. I will not get out of tight front because you put a tight end in the game. I will not get out of tight front because you put two tight ends in the game. And here is my reasoning behind that. If you talk to guys on offense about tight front, if you talk to offensive guys, they're always scheming ways to beat Boomer. I'll get back to that in a second. I don't have the exact answer, but I'll give you my thought in a minute. If you are a tight front team, offensive coordinators freak out and they have to draw up all types of beaters to tight front, pulling tackles, double teams, pin pull, all kind of scenarios they have to draw up to beat tight front. So this is strictly my opinion, and it's probably Diff already won the battle. I hope I'm still there. Connections. All right. If you put a tight end in the game and I shade the front and become a reduction front under team, you've already run the battle. You've got me out of tight. You're back in your world that you used to blocking. So I'm not getting out of the tight front. Now, with that being said, at the college level, personnel matchups, everything they do is based on matchups. Everything they do is based on trying to match personnel. I've been a high school coach for 25 years. I can't match personnel, even in the state of Florida, week in and week out. My best 11 are my best 11. My biggest guys are my biggest guys. I don't have any other bodies to put on the field. So for me, philosophically, if tight front gives people issues, I'm staying in tight front as long as I can to give people those issues. I will boss plus minus the linebackers. I will do whatever I need to do on the back end to help the angles and the leverage of the front end until I have to get out of it. I am not getting out of it until I have to. Now, are there scenarios where you're going to have to get out of it? Yes, there are. I am not going down that road until I absolutely have to because the offense wins by default if you get out because of what they do. They are now dictating what you do because of what they do. That is not a good way to play football. My opinion. So the impression is that it matters a lot when you land off on the NFL because you get 2 years or you're out. Yeah, the NFL is a sick world, coaching wise, quarterback wise. It's if you're the first round draft choice as a quarterback, how in the hell are you turning a team around in 2 years? If you're the first round draft pick, your team stinks. Now, the NFL rosters are closer than college rosters. I get that. But if you're the first round draft pick, you're going to a team that isn't very good. How good are you going to be in 2 years? It's just a crazy deal to me in the NFL. I never understood it. You go with a guy, he's the guy. You know, whatever their first year deals are, 3-year deals, whatever it is. If it's a 3-year deal and you think he's not the guy and you go somewhere else, then he becomes your backup. Like they give up on people way too early. It's a crazy world. I'm not an NFL guy, but it's just a sick world to be in. I think the kid that played last year, number 4, that ran the hell out of the ball that they didn't want to let throw. I think with a year in the system, refining passing mechanics. I think that's the guy athletically, but I also think they signed, or either last year or this year, they signed like the one of the best guys in the nation. So that could be the guy. I really don't know. I'm the wrong guy to ask about that. I don't follow Alabama that hard. 4-2-5 split field for a few years. I'm thinking testing out some of three high safety stuff is phenomenal. Um, it it freaks people out. It looks like middle of the field closed, but it's middle of the field open 90% of the time. It becomes middle of the field closed very simply. I love it. I would not change it right now for the world. We won a very, very big game for us this year against a team that we hadn't beaten in 50 years or 45 years. State powerhouse. Rosters are not equal. I would not change tight three high right now for the life of me. We're not going to. I'm not going to. Check back with me in 2 years. Maybe I will, but right now I am not. Yes, we will walk a linebacker down over the tight end or a two tight end look. That is one of our adjustments. It certainly is. Whether or not you can do that and stay three high is a different animal. Once you do that, you may need to get into the two high world, because in the tight front with the 3-2 box, most of your run fits are based around the fact that your two inside backers are A to C gap players. You lose part of that when you walk a linebacker up, but that's an animal for a different day. The soft edges with TCU, if you're playing four eyes or tight front stuff, you're going to have at least one soft edge, if not two soft edges. But in theory, you are spilling the ball by alignment and you're sending it to the edge, and then you're supporting it from the back end. So you actually want the ball out there. You want the ball spilling. You don't want it falling off the table that fast, which is an issue. But you want it in your base structure. That's where you want it. That's why you're playing that front. You're eliminating big bubbles so that the ball has to go somewhere else. That's the theory. Having run it and set to speak about it at Nike Coach of the Year Clinic in February, doing YouTube videos all the time, this is what I can tell you. Your next two answers better be protecting one of the C gaps and protecting both C gaps. That had better be your next two answers, because if you don't, you're probably in for a long night. So I am still right now, after last season, we went 8-2 district championship, lost in the first round of the playoffs, unfortunately, but I am still right now knee deep in what our next two answers are after our base tight front. Why do they draft? I don't know if they try to change them. They just try to make them fit into the NFL scheme. I think there's a lot of air raid guys. I think the air raid's different today. So maybe your true air raid quarterback, in rest his soul, Mike Leach's world, in those worlds, maybe they need to adjust to the NFL. I don't know. But the Lincoln Riley version of the air raid and the new version of the air raid is so much different now that I think those guys are more NFL ready. That's just my opinion. I think the NFL tries to change every quarterback. I think the college game is still dramatically different than the NFL game. The prototypical drop back 5-step guy isn't really there anymore. That's not the way the game's played. So I think the NFL is kind of unfortunately hurt by college football from that standpoint. I think college football guys have to win games, and I think it's easier to win with dudes that are athletic back there. Peace out, base. So I think the college game hurts the NFL game a little bit. That's another different rabbit hole, but that's just my opinion. I think three high can also fix some linebacker fitting problems in DN not sitting. Yeah, we tight front, not necessarily three high in general, but tight front fixes the ability or inability to spill. The ball is spilled by nature. But having said that, now you're dealing with some gap schemes where two pullers are on the edge, and you've got to equate your numbers a little bit differently because you can't spill the first one. So the inability to spill in a 4-2-5 structure or an under front or things like that get you in a lot of trouble. But you still at least occupy one of the pullers. In a tight front world, teams run counter and there's two guys on the edge. You got to equate your numbers and get a third guy there. But what you do in the tight front world to gap schemes is you usually create all one-on-one blocks. And in my experience of doing it, when they block down, back with the front side tackle guard center on their pull schemes because they can't handle the 4-eye backside with pullers. Once they do that, it kind of eliminates A and B gaps inside because of the nature of the down blocks and the leverage. And now guys can really run faster over the top than base settings because there aren't really any inside windows that the ball can go to. That's, again, an opinion based on doing it, based on seeing it. Most of the gap teams we played this year all decided that they wanted to go down, down, back, and create 3 solo opportunities for your D linemen. Some teams pull tackles. I'm fine with that because now they have to find tackles that can pull because most teams don't. Most teams in general do not choose their personnel at tackle to pull. So I'm okay with them pulling tackles. We know they're going to pull tackles in tight front. So the one thing I love about tight front is I think we can really narrow down the runs that we're going to see, and we can make our practices more efficient because we know there's certain runs that we're probably not going to see because the offenses hate the leverage and the angles of the blocks. Low 4-point explosive, get off the ball, 4 eyes, make it extremely difficult for an offense to run the ball. They have to get on. Yeah, we saw a bunch of unbalanced, which I'm okay with too, because a lot of the unbalanced we saw, we hadn't seen 2 weeks, 3 weeks previous. So if you're now running unbalanced and you haven't run it the whole season, I'm fine making adjustments and playing that. It's not what you do. I've already got you to do what you don't do. So I'm okay with that. Did we struggle at times with those sets? Yes, we did. Can I sit here and say that when teams came out unbalanced, we shut everything down? No, I can't say that. But we survived, and we managed to survive. And in my opinion, we did ourselves a favor because we made teams. I saw towards the end of the season this year, once our film was out, I saw a lot of structures that were not on film the night we played because teams were trying to come up with answers for tight 3 high. And in my opinion, now next year with the same schedule, does that work? Because maybe they rep that more and get better at it. I don't know. But if I'm playing my base defense and you're playing an offense that you haven't shown in 5 games, I'll take my chances every single day of the week, unless the 2 rosters are dramatically that much different. That's just philosophically how I feel about coaching. Wisconsin hired an OC with an air raid background. When you're making a drastic change philosophy, like what would be? The first thing you got to do is recruit the players to fit that system. I don't know Wisconsin's roster. I know just from the history of Wisconsin football, it's probably not built around air raid personnel. So again, with a new coach, a new scheme, you've got to give it time to recruit players. I don't think Wisconsin's roster, in my opinion, is probably set for air raid personnel. So it's going to take a year or 2 to find that. But I think all schemes can work. I'm not sold on schemes in general to say that this is what you have to do. This is what you have to do. And I'm not sold on air raid being air raid anymore. I think it's versions of air raid, but I think it's a different air raid than we're used to. If it's a guy who's dead set on being air raid from 20, 30 years ago, dead set, the way it started with Mummy Leach and those guys, then, that's a little bit of a different world. But I don't know. From what I've seen in the last 20 years, I think the most successful air raid guys are the guys that have changed and have built a running game. Lincoln Riley's, in my opinion, is the prototypical example of how to change the air raid and what to do to make it more effective. Again, not a knock on the air raid. Don't hate me, air raid people. Just an opinion. Even one of Pat Narduzzi's first checks in his even front versus power off tackle teams is a bump to 3 to a 4. Yeah, I think it changes the double teams. I think it changes the leverage. It's a matter of opinion. We got results out of it this year, so I can sit here and argue that there were years where on my YouTube channel and as a coach, I couldn't argue some of the things we were doing because the results were bad. I think I know why the results were bad. I think I know the difference between scheme and roster. Some years we did a bad job coaching. But at the same time, I think every structure you draw up has flaws, and teams can find a way to exploit those. So when people look at tight front stuff or 3 high stuff and say, well, it's weak against this, this, and this. Well, so is the 4-3, so is the 4-2-5, so is the 3-4. You can come up with an offense that it's weak against. It's just an opinion. And to me, the best defenses or the best defensive structures find a way to have change ups or answers that negate some of their weaknesses, but they're still going to play what they hang their hat on. A good state championship, getting knocked out of the main playoffs. We were champs at the D2 playoff in the semis. We were the team that got second place on D2 national a few months later. Fortunately, we didn't go to national playoff. Glad they helped. I'm glad you guys watched them. I've said this a million times. I just had some pretty neat experience at the AFCA convention, running into people that you have no idea who they are, and they say, "Hey, Coach Mac, play fast, YouTube, whatever it may be." That's always still to me kind of mind-boggling, but that's the world we live in with internet, YouTube, social media. But whether it's live comments, in person, whatever it is, it's still very humbling to me and very just gives me a sense of purpose, knowing that the reason I set out to do the things I set out to do work for some people. Now, there's people I see out there that think the website stinks. They think it all stinks. I mean, that's you put yourself out there on social media, it is what it is. But you know, yeah, I seem to have a lot of followers in the Brazil area, and the AFCA had an international segment, and I wanted to pop my head in there on some of those speakers because I think the international game is growing. I think there's a lot of great international coaches out there that are doing some really great things, and it's to me, it's a blessing and it's a privilege to know that you might have helped some of those coaches because they don't have access to a lot of the things that we have access to as coaches in the American football game. I think it's awesome that there's guys in these international leagues that are going on Zoom clinics and um, going on YouTube because maybe they can't get to a Glazier, Nike, AFCA. I think it's awesome that the AFCA now has international speakers and segments for international coaches. I think it's an amazing thing. We need the game to grow. We need the game of football to continue to evolve outside of the United States. So all those things to me are, yeah. I mean, I think that was the going back 25 years ago when I played in college. That was the mindset. Guys that couldn't make it here were going overseas and playing. And I'm not talking about NFL Europe. I'm talking about smaller European leagues. Guys were extending their career. They were traveling the world, and then they ended up coaching some of those teams. So to me, that was the great thing about a lot of those international leagues is they were giving guys internationally a chance to play our great game. And at the same time, they were giving guys on our end a chance to extend their career and visit and travel the world for a year or two until they figured out what they wanted their life to be. Some guys went overseas and decided they wanted to coach and change their career path. So the bigger the international scene gets, I think it's just better for football. It's better for all of us. And the better the game gets internationally with schematics and coaches, and I think it's good for all of us. So, been on for about an hour and 15 minutes now, and I have to get up and teach tomorrow, guys. So, again, I appreciate everything you guys do for PlayFast. I appreciate the conversations tonight. I knew having a conversation about the national championship game would stir up a lot of interesting responses, and I don't think anybody's wrong. I don't think there's one thing that anybody said tonight that's wrong. Is it a different opinion than mine? Maybe. Is it a different opinion than others? Maybe. I'm still like, I know a lot of the comments here tonight were 12-team playoffs are going to help. I'm not sold on that yet. I don't see that yet. I don't, maybe, I can see how more games would whittle out some of the teams that maybe deservedly were there, but roster wise shouldn't be there. And we'll get down to the two best teams. Maybe if there was a 12-team playoff this year, would it ended up Georgia, Alabama? Maybe, would a Clemson or somebody like that get a shot? Maybe. We'll see if it goes that route. Expansion, I don't care either way. It's not going to make me not watch football. It's not going to make me watch football more. If we go that route and they go that route and it works, then great. If they go that route and it doesn't work, well, what we're doing right now doesn't work either. So I'm good for it either way. Yeah, I think Chris, I think Georgia's scheme had answers, but I think the scheme had answers more so um, to me, the roster gap was way too big. Hey, thanks, Frank. Hope everything's going all right on your side of town. Um, I think the roster gap was way too big. I think schematically, yes, Georgia had answers. I think momentum played a part. I think the early turnover played a part, even though they held them to a field goal after that. Um, and I think it was a deal where I think the kids at TCU knew they were in for a long night. I think once the results were what they were, I think it just kind of um, basically got those kids to believe that this was going to be a long night. And anybody that's been coaching football a long time, if you're going somewhere and you know that the game is lopsided based on roster, film, talent, if you don't have success early, you know it's going to be a long night. Now, if you can hang in the game, Georgia obviously had some, they played a tremendously close game, battled adversity against Ohio State. So you can't say Georgia doesn't handle adversity. But I think, there's two ways to look at it. The longer games stay in the balance, the better team should have a chance to pull ahead. But the longer games stay in balance, the better team starts to face adversity that they've never faced before. And TCU had certainly seen adversity throughout the year. So I think a close game, probably, the confidence level. To me, it's all about confidence and momentum. And when you think you're not good enough, or you think the other team's that much better, and they come out on the first two drives and prove it, it makes it a long night. If you come out and have success early, now the sideline talk, the momentum, the deal is, hey, we can hang. I knew we could hang. I told you we could hang, as opposed to being, hey, it's going to be a long night. We're trying to go punch for punch with these guys. I don't know if we can go punch for punch with them. And you take a couple punches early and find out that your chin isn't good enough to hold up to those punches. And now it's just, snowball's a great term, out of hand. Again, if they played that game 10 times, the result would be similar, probably 7 or 8 of them. I think we'd get 1 or 2 close games, and maybe we'd get one TCU win. But to me, wasn't really close. It wasn't close on the field. It wasn't close schematically. It wasn't close talent-wise. The sad thing now is, does TCU change because they got to the big dance and schematically 3-3-5 personnel couldn't hold up against Georgia? Do you change because you got there and it's not good enough? Or do you do the things that got you there and hope that you have some answers with your roster and your scheme to make it better? That is going to be, in my opinion, probably a extremely long offseason discussion at places like TCU, maybe the Kansas States of the world, the Iowa States of the world. It was the big discussion with Gary Patterson at TCU for a while. If you're going to play 4-2-5 nickel defense every down, can you match up if you get out of conference against teams that play a different style of football? I hope they don't change. As somebody who runs a similar style of defense, I hope that they schematically and roster-wise, obviously, they try to adapt. Now, for us in high school, here's the problem. We can't adapt our roster. So if we get to a point where schematically we're playing something that's good 7 times and bad 3 times, or it's good 7 times, and maybe in your top district game or your rival game, it's not good. How do you evaluate that scheme? How do you figure out if it's the scheme? Appreciate it, Chris. Appreciate it, Brett. How do you evaluate it? To me, as a head coach coordinator, the toughest job we have is evaluating your scheme and figuring out, is it your scheme, your techniques and fundamentals, or your roster? In high school, you never want to say it's your roster because publicly you never want to talk bad about your kids. You want to defend them vehemently in public and in private. So behind closed doors, when you're having coaching talks with your staff, that's where you've got to separate, the talent gap and the scheme gap to say, okay, is what we do good enough? Is it good enough with our roster? Is it good enough against our schedule? That's, to me, going to be the age-old question. I think that's the question that you're going to have forever. And I think that's what makes what we do so intriguing, at least to me. I know, coming from our season, I know that what we do works. I know that what we do works against the people that we play, and I know that I need to have some answers against the things that we struggled with. So for me in the offseason, I know what my base is, I know what my structure is. I need to come up with answers. Now, whether those answers be different fronts, more movement, different pressures, um, that's the question that I have to keep evaluating and looking at. And as I go to clinics and try and learn in the off season, or as I talk to other three high people, um, figuring out what their answers are. I think somebody earlier brought up a great point: soft edges. Well, if you play that defense, you know you have a soft edge. Your next answer needs to be protecting that edge. Um, and for me, schematically, it seems like the progression is tight to Georgia's mint to some type of overfront or some type of possibly four down or a front that protects both C gaps, right? So you got the tight front with soft edges, but that's where you hang your hat. You've got a mint front theory where you're going to protect the C gap away from the nickel. And then you've got a theory where you protect both C gaps, whether it be an over front, maybe in the high school world, it can be a 3-3 stack front, but something that protects, excuse me, both C gaps. So I think it's for me, schematically, it's a tight front world. Protect the C gap, protect both C gaps. I think those are the three deals. And the toughest part within those three deals is, can you play them out of three high? Can you do those three things from a three high structure? Or do you have to carry a three high and a two high structure, or a three high and a middle of the field closed 8-man front deal, whether it's Ripley's match, whatever it may be? That to me is the growing question. Like I said, on my end, the question is not tight three high as a base defense. Sold, done, over. Would sell it and talk about it with anybody, especially at our level, especially with our roster. To me, the question is, what's our next answer? How do we protect a C gap? How do we protect both C gaps? Can we do it with the same personnel? If I protect soft edges by bringing in different personnel, it kind of defeats the purpose. By the time you watch me play three times, you know when that personnel group comes in what you're getting. So I know the game's a matchup game. I know it's a big personnel game. I get it. But at our level in high school, the more you can play your base defense and your answers come from the same personnel, I think you have a better chance to be successful, because now the other guy's got to guess what you're doing, or he's got to carry check with me alerts or something else to defend what you're doing, because you never change personnel. Again, like most of the things I talk about, my opinion, how I feel about the game, how I feel about what we do, where I'm going with what we do. Best thing about football to me is there is no right or wrong. I would never argue with anybody and say you can't play over, you can't play under, you can't play 3-4, you can't play four down, you can't be wishbone, you can't be single wing, you can't be air raid. I'm never going to say that, because I think you can do any of those things. I think if you do them with knowledge and passion, they can all be great. I think you can go across the 50 states and internationally, and you'll find wing T teams that won state titles. You'll find air raid teams that won state titles. You'll find single wing teams that won state titles. You'll find 3-3 stack teams, 3-4 teams, 4-2-5 teams, split field teams, single high teams, three high teams. If you do your research across all the states, I'll bet you every one of those systems has won a state title. So they're all good. There's several ways to skin a cat. You just have to figure out what's best for you. So just my opinion again. Heavy five technique to one side, usually away from the running back, and a kind of 5-0-4, but I'm not sure how that really. Yeah, I mean, 5-0-4 seems to be the big boy way to play football. It seems to be like where the Iowa States of the world and those teams went from true tight front. I'm not doing that. And the reason I'm not doing that is because as soon as you get me into 0-5, you got me right back where you want me. You've got a bubble. You've got me in a base structure. Your rules, at least to the 0-5 side, apply very similar to the way they would apply to base fronts. So I may live in that world as a changeup. Let me not say I'm not doing that. As part of my base structure, I'm not doing that because, again, not to beat a dead horse, but I think tight front's the thing that gives people issues let's give them issues and let's make them work against it. And then let's have answers to fix it. But I would say, yes, the prevalent theory versus certain personnel groups is definitely 405 or 4I05. Yes, it's definitely shading to three-man surfaces, but now you're an underfront. If you play 5-0-4I, how are you not an underfront? Even if you're 3-4, 3-3 personnel, you essentially have gotten yourself into an underfront. You've got yourself another big bubble. If you play with a shaded nose, now you've got two big bubbles, in my opinion, or at least a big bubble and a small bubble. Tight front world, there's really not a bubble. So, uh, again, that's us. That's me. That's who we are. So, probably different conversation, different YouTube live, different night. But I appreciate everything you guys do. Thanks for watching. If you're not a subscriber on the channel, you guys probably are because you probably know about YouTube Live through your notifications. But if you're not subscribed, turn the notifications on. Thumbs up, thumbs down, all the YouTube videos. Always check me out on Twitter, Coach Mac 8740. I answer any questions that come my way. Leave a comment on the YouTube channel. I answer any one of those. And if you ask me about a video and I can do it, I'll do it. I'm not here without you guys, so I appreciate everything you do. Remember, you won't play well until you play fast. New colors. I will see you guys next time.